go to the wall. It's too big to fail, it's sclerotic, it is on its last legs. Imagine, my last point is, imagine you're living in a rickety old house. It needs fundamental renovation. But if you actually undertake those renovations, you might bring the whole edifice down, and it might be better instead to start anew.
Well, I'm very glad to be here, and I'm delighted to be speaking against this motion because, let me tell you, I love the capitalist system. And what I want to say to you is three things, basically. Firstly, that capitalism has succeeded over its 230 years of existence beyond the wildest dreams of the people who initially advocated it. Secondly, that success has not just been about wealth, though we should never sneer at wealth. It's only those who already have wealth who can afford to be snooty about it. But it's not just that, it has succeeded in many other ways. And thirdly, that despite what the previous speaker has just said, the best is yet to come, and I am confident this will continue to be the case. Now, my colleague here said something which I think all of us should never forget, and that is that you are, without a doubt, the luckiest generation of people ever. The only people that you should envy, really, are your descendants. Because for the greater part of human history, poverty was the norm. There's no need to explain poverty. Poverty is the default natural condition of human beings. It is wealth that needs explanation, and wealth that has causes. The United Nations estimates that in 1820, 80% of the world's population at that time lived on the then equivalent of $1.50 a day in today's money. In other words, what the United Nations defines as complete abject poverty. 20 years ago, that figure had dropped to 30% of the world's population. It is now down to 15% of the world's population. Still too high, but the trajectory is very, very clear. And that's in marked contrast to the whole of human history before then. The living standards of a French peasant, say, or an English peasant farmer in 1820 were pretty much the same as those of a Roman farmer 2,000 years previously. Nothing much had changed in the whole of human history until we invented capitalism in the 18th century. The United Nations set very ambitious millennium goals about 2 decades ago. Those goals have all been realized. Most of them have been realized before the target date that was set for them. Not only that, but in most of human history, the way to achieve great wealth, the way to achieve comfort, was to be a plunderer and a robber. The people, the wealthy in most of human society, were robber barons. They were people who looted wealth from the population over whom they ruled, the productive classes. Under capitalism, the way to great wealth is to produce useful products and services that you can sell to other people. Henry Ford became one of the richest men in the world, indeed not just the United States, by producing cars, by organizing the production of cars which brought mobility and convenience within the reach of ordinary people, and by paying his employees a wage which was well in excess of the highest average wage of the time. But it isn't just wealth, although, as I say, we should never forget that. Some of you may know there's an actress, Shirley MacLaine. Shirley is constantly sharing with us her past lives, and I'm just a bit skeptical for various reasons. But one reason why I'm skeptical is because apparently in all of her past lives she was a high priestess or a princess or a queen. Statistically, that's incredibly unlikely, because in every human society before capitalism, 90% of the population were peasant farmers or their spouses. There really wasn't much of an option for most people. You live in a world where, thanks to capitalism, there is an enormous range of human options open to you. You can be a whole range of things that would have been beyond the wildest dreams of people, even 100 years ago, never mind 200 years ago. Contrary to what you've heard, the initial 100 years of the capitalist era, the Industrial Revolution so-called, actually saw a rise in living standards. That has been established beyond any doubt by generations of historians. There was an enormous argument about that. that argument came to an end because the empirical evidence overwhelmingly supported the case that the early period of industrialization saw a rise in living standards, not a decline. That's why the critics are now forced to say that while people's incomes went up, their subjective quality of life declined, which is not something you can easily or readily measure. It is also the case, not only that society is more pluralistic, but despite again what you have heard, it is also cleaner and safer. The environment, the quality of the environment in wealthy societies has actually improved over the last 100 years or 150 years. The truly devastating combination for the environment is large populations with primitive technologies and economic organizations. The whole logic of a capitalist system is to use resources more efficiently. That means less waste and less pollution. We are far less polluted now than we were 100 years ago. North America has twice as much tree cover as it did, for example, in 1900. Not a fact that you will commonly hear alluded to or affirmed. And also, what about the future? What does the future hold? Now, I do not wish to minimize the kind of discomfort or suffering that people are going through as a result of the financial crisis of several years ago, any more than we should overlook the kinds of troubles that occurred, for example, in the 1930s or indeed at an earlier period, in the 1880s or 1890s. However, if you look at the long-term graph of economic growth, of living standards, in the 20th century, for example, you hardly notice even the economic cataclysm of the Great Depression. The underlying trend of growth is so strong and so powerful and so sustained that even terrible economic cataclysms such as that, and we haven't, thank God, seen quite the depths that we did in the terrible years between 1929 and 1934, even things like that make hardly any impression upon the general long-run growth of living standards and the increase in human capacity, human potential and human experience that they represent and bring about. We may be going through some rough times at the moment, but I am confident, and all of the experience of the last 250 years speaks in my favour, that in fact this will be overcome, and that we will see in the future a return to prosperity and at even higher levels than we have had before. The key to capitalism, the crucial thing that makes capitalist growth different from growth in other periods of history, is that it is based upon innovation. The really important pieces of news that you should be paying attention to are not the political news. I take the Nassim Nicholas Taleb view here. There is no man so ignorant, no woman so ill-informed as the one who reads nothing but newspapers and watches news programs. Because basically they're just a form of entertainment which is designed to delude you. You should read rather about the technology reports. You should be reading about things like 3D printing and some of the other developments that are being developed right now by the capitalist system. These are going to transform your lives and the lives of the people who come after you. I tell you that capitalism, in the time it has existed on this world, has transformed human society radically and fundamentally. It has transformed it for the better, and that transformation is a process that will continue, and I'm confident will do so. I ask you to reject this motion because it is simply a ludicrous motion. Thank you.
So we thank all the speakers for their speeches, and now we invite questions from the floor. So questions, please keep them relatively short, address them to one side or the other, or perhaps even both sides. What's the speech about talk? We've got about 40 minutes for questions. So, can we have the first question, please? Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that the environment is improved under capitalism. I'd say maybe under early capitalism it got worse, and maybe it's improved now. But as we're seeing in like China and India and places where they're vastly growing at the moment, they're having massive economic issues right now due to the massive production of goods and burning fossil fuels. What would you reply to that?
Great, just to take 2 points to say that. First of all, you should not underestimate the amount of environmental damage that occurred before industrialization took hold. Sicily, for example, used to be the breadbasket of Italy. Now they use it to make those spaghetti westerns. Those lunar landscapes that Clint Eastwood and his mates are writing to were actually shot in Sicily. And that's because during the Middle Ages, they didn't enforce property rights and land property. They allowed goats to roam all over the mountainsides, and they ate all the cover off, and the whole thing got eroded. So you've had massive environmental disasters before industrialization. The crucial thing is lack of enforceable property rights. That's what do these kind of things. The other thing is this. You mentioned China and India and other places that are enjoying rapid economic growth at the moment. The point is that the more rich they become, the more they will find ways to reduce the admittedly currently damaging pollution effects that they're experiencing. Not only that, the whole system, provided that it is allowed to work properly, will give actors, producers, very powerful incentives to reduce that pollution, because basically that's a waste, and waste is formed on opportunity for profit. So the whole system is actually set up to give people incentives to actually produce less waste and to produce things in a more cleanly and economically efficient manner.
See, I don't think that's an accurate picture of what's happening with the environment in contemporary global economy. When we look at the scale of deforestation, of the massive biodiversity loss, without even mentioning climate change, which I'm not even sure if my opponents accept as real. Now, the key question is whether capitalism can respond to this environmental crisis. And it says it can. It can make a business opportunity out of pollution. We can have ecosystem services. We can, the market, we've seen the whole attempt to deal with climate change through carbon trading, through making a commodity out of carbon. And have you seen this tremendous progress we've been making in addressing climate change over the past 20 years through the market? No, of course we haven't. And of course the other question is about innovation. And the real question is can this society innovate new forces of production, new ecological technologies? But instead, we see the massive dash for gas and the drive for fracking, for extreme energy. It seems like capitalism is like a crack addict. It's hooked upon fossil fuels, and there's no way it can wean itself off them, because it's based upon ever more expansion and growth. That's the only way capitalism can survive. It's like a shark. If it stops swimming, it drowns. It has to keep growing. And therefore, we can't solve the environmental crisis within the boundaries of capitalism or its logic of expansion.
Actually, could I just respond to that very quickly? My opponent on this side was citing Marx quite a few times before. Marx actually believed in economic growth. One of the things he liked about capitalism was precisely the fact that it was a dynamic system that has led to economic growth for the first time in human history. You can't, if you believe in socialism, you won't be able to have any kind of socialist society that you would like if you don't have economic growth. You might be able to have some kind of socialism rather like that of old Kingdom Egypt or the Incas with an autocratic god king, but you're not going to be able to have any kind of socialism like
That's why.
Okay, let's go to another question. Question for the proposition. Yes.
Just a question. Yeah, you mentioned that capitalism is highly flawed, etc. But how do you explain the fact that all the rising powers, the BRIC countries, Brazil, India, China, are all adopting the free market solution, and they are the ones that are doing far more fossil speed, and places like the West which seem to have overspent and seem to be turning their back on capitalism?
Well, I mean, my view of the BRICS in that sense, particularly China, but sort of get on that, is well, of course, if you want to compete in the global economy, so Cuba back in the day could get by having its entire sugar crop being bought up by the Soviet Union. That block doesn't exist anymore. You have to. Capitalism is a global system of production. I think it's aim of making very correct point. It is the most cooperative society that we have. That's absolutely true. It's a global system of cooperation. So you have to find your way into that, to find a space in that system. Now, what's interesting is that the way that why does China have spectacular growth rates? Well, you wouldn't expect it at all, because one of the things capitalism tends to do when after a certain point in its development is increase the productivity of labour. China has pretty terrible productivity of labour. What it does have is very, very cheap labour, and lots of it. Why is the labour cheap? Because there's an authoritarian state keeping people down. That's so that in a sense is it's a very fragile growth.